My name is Paul Bichler, and I'm Executive Creative Director at Saatchi and Saatchi in New York on the Tide business. And I'm going to take you through our team's Super Bowl work from this year. How many of you saw it? I'm just curious how many people were watching the Super Bowl. Okay, good percentage of you, great. Along with me here are a couple members of our team that I'm going to embarrass in the background there. Aaron, Leah, Jacopo. We're well represented here with folks from Saatchi. First, I'm going to tell you a little bit about Tide because this plays into the context of how we do the Super Bowl and why we do the Super Bowl. So I imagine if you've lived in the States for a while, you're probably pretty familiar with Tide. It's been around for 70 plus years in the market here, so it's on multiple generations of users. It's one of the most well-known supermarket brands that there are. It does multi-billion dollars in sales. An enormous number of people use this brand. It's approaching half of the market for the category that it's in. So it has an enormous user base, and it has near universal awareness. So most people are familiar with the brand and know what it stands for, know what it does, and know its benefits. And there's a really deep passion for this brand. It's a brand that people have an incredibly strong affinity for. It was one of three brands that people were simply not willing to give up during the recession. So think about that. They were going to give up all these other things before they were going to give up what detergent brand that they were using. So it strikes a really deep passion with people, and that begs the question. Tide has a long history of doing Super Bowl ads. These are 4 right here. And why does Tide do them when they're in that position in the market? So how many of you remember Talking Stain from about 10 years ago? One of the most loved Super Bowl ads, about 5 years after, was Miracle Stain, another Super Bowl surprise that was really well received. And last year we did Bradshaw Stain. So the position that they're in and having this history of Super Bowl ads, why are they making that type of investment in the Super Bowl? And they do it really for one reason, and that is they know that when people go to the supermarket, they have a choice to make, and every time that choice is made, they could choose something else. And so they use it to really deepen the love for this brand. And that's how they brief us. So our brief for the last 2 years for the Super Bowl was really pretty simple. And this is how they told us to do the Super Bowl. Be the most loved brand of the Super Bowl, which sounds incredibly simple, but is hugely challenging. If you think about the Super Bowl in the context of the Super Bowl, it draws out the best of this industry. It's when people are watching advertising. It's very expensive to do, so people are making large investments, putting their best work forward. And it's a platform for innovation. Because it really comes at a premium and it's an expensive thing to do, everyone is looking to figure out different ways to either participate in the game, around the game, have a point of view on the game, and to get some value out of this huge experience. So if you think over the last few years, what's actually gone on in the Super Bowl, you've had brands that weren't in the Super Bowl make amazing work out of the fact that they weren't in the Super Bowl. You've had people innovating with the platform of the Super Bowl, doing live ads. You've had the moments of the Super Bowl create entire conversations outside of the game. Left Shark, the blackout, and brands jumping on both of those things and really making a lot of value out of that. And so the question for us was, how do you stand out? This is a really competitive landscape. It's drawing out the best of this industry. And so being the strategic folks that we were, we said, screw it, we're going to do everything. And of course, we laughed at that. Our client didn't really laugh at that, given what comes along with that idea. But that started a really good conversation. It was, what does everything mean in the Super Bowl? And we broke it down into 4 pieces that we thought we needed to get value from in order to make this really pay off. The first was the game itself. So we're in the context of a football game. How are we going to use that? How is that going to be an asset for us, given that we're paying this premium in order to buy into this game? The second was the commentary. So how are we going to make use of the personalities that surround the game? There's so much talk around the game. There's so much network activity around the game. How is that going to become an asset for us to further our cause? The social chatter around the game. Everybody has a point of view on the game and everything that's happening in it. And what are we going to put out there that people can participate in? Because, again, we're looking for that value that goes beyond what we're going to buy. And lastly, the commercial. It almost seems like an afterthought, but we have to do some really great advertising to make this work. So it's so far beyond buying a spot to really get the value to make this thing pay off that we're looking at all 4 of these things. And last year, we took the same approach, and we did this program called Bradshaw Stain, where if you think about those 4 criteria, we used the network assets. We partnered with Fox in order to integrate a live moment with Terry Bradshaw getting the stain on himself. We used the game itself, the context of the football game. So we were using the actual teams and the jerseys of the team. So it felt like it's this moment that was integrated right in the game. The social chatter, we divided up our program into 2 parts, where we had Terry first stained on camera, and then we used our advertising to show him freaking out and figuring out how to fix it. And lastly, we made a spot. I mean, part of our buy was the traditional media buy of buying a spot. And it did really well for us. Last year, we were number 5 on the ad meter. Got a lot of media written about the program that we did. A lot of media impressions, and it earned a lot of media. It was creating the value that we needed to get out of a program to justify the Super Bowl when basically everybody knows who Tide is. So that added a 4th question for us, which was, how are we going to beat last year? Because it did well for us, and every year the bar gets raised. If we want to do this again, and we want to justify it again, we need to bring something to the table that feels like it's going to outdo what we did the year before. And we knew we were going to have some really steep competition. The advertisers in the Super Bowl, most of it's released beforehand. You know who's going to be in well beforehand. And then shortly before the game, you know what the ads actually are. So we had a pretty good idea that it's going to be a big deal, and it's going to be hard to outdo what we did before. So we took, again, our conservative approach and tried, we're going to be everywhere. But what we actually pitched with that, the idea behind this statement was, we are going to be in every single ad in the Super Bowl, but you're only going to pay for a few of them. And the response was, okay, we're listening. That sounds like that's going to pay off for us. And so we did that through flipping what we had done in the Super Bowl before on its head. If you saw that slide earlier we had Talking Stain, Miracle Stain, Bradshaw Stain. Stains cause drama, and we always focused on stains as being the point of drama that we were going to highlight. This year we said, well, they're not everywhere, but clean is pretty much everywhere. What if we just say, we're going to claim clean. We're going to own the idea of clean throughout the Super Bowl. So if you ever see anything that's clean, maybe that's working for us. And so we took our tagline, if it's got to be clean, it's got to be Tide. This has been used for probably 20 plus years in the market. And just made a pretty simple modification and said, well, if it's clean, it's got to be Tide. And that gave us a funny permission to play with all of the assets of the game, where we could look at every factor from the network, what the network was doing, the other advertising, the players themselves, any piece that was clean, we were going to have a cheeky point of view on and claim it as a Tide ad. And so what we did was we created a game around the game where to extend our presence and extend this idea, we were going to live outside of any media that we bought. We were going to teach the viewer how to watch the advertising in the game. And what we were going to teach them was look for anything that's clean, and it might be turning into a Tide ad. And we signed up David Harbour to be the person to help us do this. And we looked at, we're at the place now where we're feeling like we have an idea that we like. This is good, this is fun, we're laughing along, we're having a good time making each other laugh with what this is. But let's visualize, how do we want the world to react to this? Like, what are people going to think of this? Like, are they going to like it? Are they not? Which is a pretty scary proposition when you're doing something at this profile. And so we made up our imaginary headlines. How do we think the world is going to react? And it was, oh, this will be funny. What if, basically, what's your favorite ad of the Super Bowl? Or what was your favorite Tide ad of the Super Bowl? Because they're all Tide ads. And we started playing with that idea and finding different ways into the execution, basically by saying, what is the response that we want, and what is going to bring about that response? But this was very different than most of the spots that we do. Most of the spots that we do are quite rational and direct, and we needed to look at this in an entirely different way. We knew this was not going to be a simple program for the viewer to understand, and we were going to ask for a lot of patience and a lot of participation. We were trying to own essentially 3 hours of content with 90 seconds of airtime. And so we wanted to be top of mind that entire experience, but we didn't have a lot to do it with. And so we came up with these keys to success. These were principles that we developed early on. We had written a few scripts at this point, but we knew they would change. But we looked at it from an architecture perspective and said, in order to achieve this goal of owning really the experience of the game for this brand, what are we going to need to do? And so the first thing was, well, we have to treat it as an experience. We have to treat this as a holistic experience. Look at it from end to end of what is the viewing experience of the Super Bowl. And so we basically dissected the Super Bowl. When is the advertising happening? What are the throw tos and from the advertising? How does the network get involved? Basically looking at every facet of it and then making a plan. The second was that as a pretty complicated idea that seems very simple on its surface, repetition was going to be essential. If somebody missed something at the beginning, it could really mess up the whole program. We had to be present enough with the money that we had to make this something that people would catch on, and yet not basically burn out the experience that we were creating. If we knew if we overdid it, it would be a problem. If we didn't do enough, people wouldn't connect the dots. And so, third, it was the pacing and the placement were really key parts of the creative. What we were essentially doing was trying to tell a 3-hour joke, and that's basically based on comedic timing. So we knew we would have to be present at points, and we'd have to go away, because it was all based on a surprise as well. So how are we going to maintain that surprise? That means we're going to disappear for a while, and when you least expect it, we're going to come back. We're going to come back in a different format. We're going to come back with the misdirect of the understanding that it was actually a different brand, and then turn it into a Tide ad. And in order to do that, we were going to need some really good company, because we were trying to establish these misdirects and claim this entire, basically, claim the advertising experience for this brand. We were going to need to partner with some people in order to do this. We were not going to be able to do this entirely on our own if we really wanted to be effective. There were a few things that we could, I think, pretty easily establish the genre of things we were doing, but we knew that if we could really partner with the other brands, this thing would be so much more credible, and I think everyone would get a bigger laugh out of it in the end. And so this is what the program looked like. We divided it up clearly by the game with the 4 quarters, halftime, and the different types of media that we were going to put in it. So the first quarter was launch the idea. This was absolutely critical and was probably the hardest part of doing this. And the reason being is because we had a great time writing this stuff. We had a great time making it and shooting it. This is where we had to make the hardest choices. We left some of our favorite jokes on the cutting room floor for the sake of clarity, because this is where the idea had to land and had to set the premise that was going to carry through the rest of the game. And if we went for humor over absolute clarity, the program would fall apart. And then we came back 3 additional times throughout the game. So a lot of people find it surprising that the media of this was actually only 4 pieces. in television media, because we were staging it to create the idea that it was much larger than what it was. It was 90 seconds of television advertising, which I think we were able to create an impression that it was much more. We had 2 additional network assets, which were things that we worked with NBC on. So the throw tos and the throw froms commercials, when the network would be going to a commercial break. We had a conversation with NBC about using those as basically bumpers, which brands typically participate in, but we wanted to challenge what that could be and turn those into hardworking creative for us. So we developed those 2 as well, which gave us a step outside of the world of advertising and provided another surprise. And then there was an entire social program that was underpinning this entire thing. So we launched it socially at the time that the ad was going to run. We worked with other brands and celebrities and influencers to basically engage once the idea was out there and start to play with us. Continued that through the 4th quarter and then had a wrap up. And so the 3 partners that we worked with as brands were Budweiser, Mr. Clean, and Old Spice. And then we simulated the idea of other types of advertising without associations with the brands. Now, in partnering with each of these brands, we could not mention the brands. So we needed to find brands that had a very iconic presence on their own, because if you've worked in Super Bowl advertising before, you can't have 2 brands in one spot. It's against the rules of the NFL and the networks. So we wanted things that were clearly understood as other brands' assets to flip them into Tide ads. So at this point, we're like, all right, we're off to the races, but as usual, there's one more surprise. And the one more challenge, one more surprise we had was, we had this funny thing that we wanted to do, but we wanted to keep it a secret, but we also wanted it to be famous. So how do you make a secret famous? And that's what we had to figure out beforehand, because most Super Bowl advertising these days is released before the game. That's where a lot of the consumption of it, where most of the press is written about it, well before game time. And we didn't want to miss out on that experience, but we also didn't want to give up what we were going to do. So what we decided was we would have a program that, that basically let people know that we were going to be in the game, and to look out for Tide, but wouldn't reveal what we were going to do. And so what we decided to do, given that this was the landscape we were dealing with, brands that are going to be released beforehand, where people are already saying, oh, this is going to win the ad meter, this is going to be the most impressive thing, we decided our best bet was to bring back Terry Bradshaw from last year and publicly fire him. And so we ran a couple of spots beforehand, which basically said, we're not doing what we did last year. We're going to be in the Super Bowl, though. And so these were 2 teasers that we ran beforehand and set out to the press.
Hey, guys. Is that Bradshaw? Hey, who's got a key? What do you like me out for?
And so we wanted the idea and the association with David established before the game, so that as we were doing these different things, it would relate back to the brand. And we wouldn't miss out on it because we weren't dealing with the face that everybody already knows. If you're not a Stranger Things fan, you probably don't know David. So the second one in the teaser campaign was this.
Because it gives,
Hey,
gives
oh,
them like, hello.
hey, what's going on here?
I'm shooting a Tide ad for the Super Bowl.
Shooting a Tide ad?
Yeah, apparently last year the guy who did it really dropped the ball.
Really? Yeah, is that what they say? Drop the ball?
Yeah, that's what they said.
So then it's game day. And what I'm going to show now is the actual advertising that ran and in its sequence, and tell you where each of the ones ran in the experience. So first up was that first quarter spot that established the idea and basically cast it open to any potential ad of any genre could turn out to be a Tide ad.
Yeah, just your typical Super Bowl car ad. Right?
Or a hilarious beer ad.
Or whatever ad this is.
Whatever.
But it's a Tide ad.
What?
It's a Tide ad.
What makes it a Tide ad?
There are no stains. Look at those clean clothes. What else would this be an ad for? A razor?
No. Tide ad.
Cold, refreshing.
Tide ad.
Meet the all-new.
No, it's a Tide ad. Tide.
So, does this make every Super Bowl ad a Tide ad?
I think it does. Watch and see.
So that's where we threw it open to the entire audience and basically to the entire advertising landscape that was going to be part of the Super Bowl. And that was in the first quarter. So we wanted to be early in the game to be able to establish this early enough on that there's going to be a lot that follows us, that the consumer is going to basically hopefully have this idea in their head the entire time, like, okay, that was kind of weird, but is this going to turn into a Tide ad? And so our second time back was in the second quarter, and we decided to use one of the most iconic things that we had available to us, which was Old Spice. They had agreed to do this program with us. Isaiah signed on to do it, had a lot of fun with it. And so we decided that should be in the second place because this is now, people have been introduced to the idea. They might not be sure what's going to happen, but once they saw this, they kind of all went, oh, they're really doing this, aren't they?
Hello again, ladies. Is your man the kind of man who would climb the height? I'm in a Tide ad.
Nice pants.
Get off my horse.
Tide ad.
So next was one of the NFL assets. So at the, this was, I believe, in the second quarter, or this was right before the halftime. We used a network asset with the NFL to turn that into a Tide ad as well. So we were kind of getting outside of what the brand advertising world was and going into the world of the network.
Recounts of the game without the consent of NFL Productions is prohibited.
Welcome back to another Tide ad.
Point Asa Yuri Boyna, the winner of this year's.
So that's a bumper. We could provide some graphics and a little bit of footage. The audio was going to be recorded by NBC, so they agreed to let us give them the script for what we were going to do. So we were pushing the boundaries of, like, normally people just kind of run a logo there and say, Super Bowl brought to you by this brand. We flipped that on its head a little bit and challenged the assumptions of what we could do with it, knowing that it would have a pretty disproportionate effect because now it felt like, wait, the network's in on this joke as well. And then a little behind the scenes on this. So we, this program was shot the third week of January. The Super Bowl was February 4th. So this is, we were literally shooting this 3 weeks before the game was going to happen. I believe the second or the third day of our shoot, Budweiser agreed to let us use some Clydesdale footage. Now, that was been a long-going negotiation. We had pretty much given up on it, and they said, we like it. We think there's a good mutual success in this. So sure, go ahead. Now, we were already in the middle of our shoot, so we're improvising of what we can do with Budweiser because it's such an amazing, iconic brand, and trying to figure this out essentially on set. And this is what we came up with. Now, this is, there's two assets in here. We felt at this point that the program was established enough that we could take a 15 and actually split it into two 7.5-second spots. And we did that to feel like the program was bigger. We felt like the idea was established and clear enough, and we could get into quicker hits. That media format was not available to us to actually buy, so we were taking something we had and segmenting it already just via our own edit.
Beautiful. Like a Tide ad.
Sarah? Sarah!
It's a Tide ad.
So those ran back to back. without any separation in between them. But again, it felt like, okay, 2 more ads, and as people left the experience, I think most people felt that they were longer than they really were. Those were actually very, very short ads. And then our 4th ad was not a brand ad, but it was one that we all thought was going to be really fun, and that was the genre of pharma advertising, and how does this play a role in with Tide?
Sometimes the signs are hard to ignore. But whenever you see clothes this clean, that's a Tide ad.
Clean clothes may be an indication of a Tide ad. Tide users experience 10 times more cleaning power. Tide is America's #1 detergent in America.
And so while all of that was happening during the game, outside of the game, we were partnering with influencers, celebrities, and basically had a live action newsroom that was going, responding to the conversation that was happening online. Because we knew that a huge portion of the success of this was going to be outside of the viewing audience, or basically in parallel to the viewing audience, of people making this thing their own. It was intentionally left quite open-ended, that people could parody it, play with it, memify it, do what they wanted with it. And so we kicked that off with a few different influencers, and then responded to people. And a lot of brands during the Super Bowl responded to us, many of them basically just saying our ad was not a Tide ad, which we felt great about. I don't know if they did. And that was the program. And this is many of the people involved that brought it to you. So this was a massive undertaking by a very integrated team. I could not count the number of people that were involved from beginning to end, but it was an incredibly fun process, and I think it shows in the work, and it was an incredibly collaborative process. So this is the group here. And the results of it, it did really well for the brand. So we were the #2 trending topic on Twitter. The only thing that beat us was the hashtag Super Bowl itself. I believe there was 45,000 uses of Tide ad during the game. We had a 26% share of voice. But the most gratifying one was all those headlines that we had used as part of our pitch at the beginning actually started to come true, where the networks were all playing with this the next day on their morning shows of what was a Tide ad, what wasn't. CNN's email headline the next morning was, "This email is not a Tide ad." Overall, it resulted in about 680 media placements, or over that. A lot of people wrote about the program. The earned media numbers, that doesn't even make sense to me. I don't know. It's a big number. And the share of voice that continued afterwards of the conversation around Super Bowl maintained at about 17.8% of the conversation was about this program. And that is the entirety.